When Porsche stopped making the 993 in 1998, they closed a chapter that had been running for over 3 decades. Between 1993 and 1998, they built exactly 68,881 examples of what would become the final air-cooled 911. When the 996 showed up for the 1999 model year, everything changed. Water cooling replaced the air-cooled system that had defined every 911 since 1963. The reason for this change wasn't just about performance. Porsche's engineers hit a wall with emissions regulations. The old air-cooled system simply didn't have enough reserves to meet the stricter emissions rules coming from both Europe and the United States. Water jackets and bigger radiators gave the new flat-six engine room to breathe while keeping cabin heat and noise under control. But for many enthusiasts, something essential was lost in that transition. Think about it this way: every single 911 before 1999 shared the same basic cooling philosophy. Whether you were talking about a 1965 911 or a 1997 993 Turbo S, they all used air flowing over cooling fins to keep the engine temperatures in check. That's a 35-year run of mechanical consistency that you simply don't see in the automotive world anymore. The 993 represents the peak of air-cooled engineering at Porsche. Under the hood sits a revised version of the M64 3.6-liter flat-six engine. Early models made 272 horsepower, while later versions pushed that number to 285. This wasn't just about more power though. The engine featured lighter internal components and hydraulic valve lash adjusters, making it the quietest and most refined air-cooled 6 Porsche ever built, while still allowing it to rev harder than its predecessors. Here's where things get interesting from a technical standpoint. The 993's engine used a different approach to oil cooling compared to earlier 911s. Instead of just relying on the oil cooler mounted in the front bumper, Porsche added additional oil spray jets that directly cooled the undersides of the pistons. This might sound like a small detail, but it was crucial for reliability, especially in hot climates or during spirited driving sessions. The compression ratio jumped to 11.3 to 1, which was aggressive for a naturally aspirated engine in the mid-1990s. This higher compression, combined with better combustion chamber design, is what allowed Porsche to extract more power while actually improving fuel economy compared to the earlier 964 generation. Starting in 1996, Porsche added something called VarioRam to Carrera models. This variable length intake system broadened the torque curve without needing turbochargers. The system automatically adjusted intake runner length based on engine speed, giving you better low-end torque and stronger top-end power. Below 5,000 RPM, the system used longer intake runners for better torque. Above that threshold, it switched to shorter runners for maximum horsepower up top. What made VarioRam clever wasn't just the concept, it was the execution. The system used vacuum-operated flaps that opened and closed based on throttle position and engine speed. When everything was working together, you got the best of both worlds: usable torque for daily driving and screaming top-end power when you needed it. The 993 was also the first production 911 to get a 6-speed manual transmission. Those closer gear ratios kept the flat-six engine in its sweet spot, whether you were cruising on the highway or attacking a mountain road. The gear spacing was particularly well thought out. First gear was short enough for parking lot maneuvers, while sixth gear was tall enough for comfortable highway cruising without the engine screaming at 3,500 RPM like earlier 911s. If you wanted an automatic, Porsche offered the Tiptronic S, which was a significant improvement over earlier automatic transmissions in sports cars. The S version added manual shift capability and more aggressive shift programming. While purists might scoff, the Tiptronic S was actually quite good for its time and made the 993 more accessible to a broader range of drivers. But perhaps the most important upgrade was hiding underneath. The 993 introduced the first aluminum multi-link rear suspension system, which Porsche called the Weissach axle. This was a huge deal because it finally solved the lift-off oversteer problem that had plagued 911s since 1964. The rear engine layout that made 911s so distinctive also made them tricky to drive at the limit. Lift off the throttle mid-corner in an older 911, and the tail could swing around without warning. The Visaw axle used a complex arrangement of aluminum links and bushings that actually provided toe-in under braking and toe-out under acceleration. This sounds complicated, but the result was simple. The car stayed planted when you needed it to, while still allowing the rear end to rotate when you wanted it to. It was like having a mechanical stability control system that worked purely through suspension geometry. The front suspension got attention too, with revised geometry that improved turn-in response and reduced the effort required for parking and low-speed maneuvers. The combination of front and rear suspension improvements transformed the 993's handling characteristics compared to earlier 911s. The 993 also looked more modern than any 911 before it. The bumpers were now flush with the body and made from integrated polyurethane rather than separate pieces. The headlights sat flatter against the nose, and the overall aerodynamics improved significantly, with a drag coefficient of just 0.33. It looked contemporary while keeping those classic 911 proportions that made it instantly recognizable. The body improvements weren't just cosmetic. The 993 was the first 911 to use fully galvanized steel construction, which dramatically improved corrosion resistance. Earlier 911s were notorious for rust issues, particularly around the battery box and rear suspension mounting points. The 993 largely solved these problems through better materials and improved assembly processes. For those who wanted the ultimate 993 experience, Porsche offered the Turbo and Turbo S models. These were the first 911s to use twin turbochargers, and they came with all-wheel drive as standard equipment. The Turbo made 408 horsepower, while the Turbo S pushed that to 424. These were the last air-cooled Super 911s, and they represented the absolute peak of what was possible with the old cooling system. The twin-turbo setup was a masterpiece of engineering. Instead of using one small turbocharger like the earlier 930 Turbo, Porsche mounted two smaller KKK turbos, one for each bank of cylinders. This reduced turbo lag significantly while allowing for higher boost pressures. The result was a car that felt much more linear in its power delivery compared to the on-off nature of the single-turbo 930. The all-wheel drive system in the turbo models was sophisticated for its time. Unlike some all-wheel drive systems that split power 50-50 front to rear, the 993 Turbo normally sent most of its power to the rear wheels, only engaging the front wheels when traction was needed. This preserved the rear-wheel drive character that made 911 special while adding the security of all-wheel traction. But here's what made the 993 Turbo truly special. It was fast in a way that modern cars struggle to match. Sure, a current 911 Turbo S will absolutely destroy a 993 Turbo S in a straight line, but the 993 delivered its performance with a rawness and intensity that's been largely engineered out of modern sports cars. The turbo whistle, the mechanical fan noise, the direct steering, it all combined to create an experience that felt genuinely dangerous in the best way possible. Driving a 993 today feels remarkably different from any modern sports car. The dimensions are compact, actually narrower than a current Cayman. When you start the engine, you immediately hear that signature mechanical fan whirring in the background. This is the sound of air being pulled through the cooling fins on the engine, something no water-cooled car can replicate. The fan isn't just for show either. It's a thermostatically controlled unit that varies its speed based on engine temperature. At idle in cool weather, it barely spins. Get the engine hot on a summer day or during spirited driving, and it sounds like a jet engine spooling up. This direct connection between engine temperature and audible feedback is something modern cars have completely lost. Work the engine past 4,000 RPM, and you're rewarded with a raspy howl that's completely unfiltered by water jackets or complex exhaust systems. The sound is raw and mechanical in a way that modern engines simply can't match. When you lift off the throttle, that turbine-like fan spin gradually fades into the background. It's a mechanical symphony that connects you directly to what the engine is doing. The steering in base Carrera models is completely unassisted, giving you pure telepathic feedback from the front wheels. You can feel every imperfection in the road surface, every change in grip level, every subtle shift in the car's attitude. The Carrera 4, 4S, and Turbo models have light power assistance, but even then, the connection between driver and road remains incredibly direct. The new rear suspension means you can push harder with more confidence, but the car never feels disconnected or overly refined. There's still an element of danger lurking just beyond the limit of adhesion. The 993 rewards smooth inputs and punishes ham-fisted driving, but it does so in a way that teaches you to be a better driver rather than simply covering up your mistakes. Many people call the 993 the last true 911, but is that really fair? There are several arguments for why this label makes sense. First, there's the mechanical purity of air cooling. This system created an unbroken link between every 911 from 1963 to 1998. When water cooling arrived, it brought liquid pump line and radiator grills that fundamentally changed the character of the car. The 993 also maintained a driver-first approach to ergonomics. The pillars are thin, the cowl is low, and the dashboard is refreshingly simple. There are no screens competing for your attention, no complicated infotainment systems to navigate. You get in, start the engine, and drive. The radio might have a cassette player if you're lucky, and that's about as high-tech as it gets. From a technology standpoint, the 993 represents the last of the minimal computer era. Sure, it has OBD2 diagnostics because regulations required it, but there's no stability control system, no traction control, no electronic nannies trying to keep you out of trouble. Your right foot remains the primary traction control device. The car trusts you to know what you're doing, which is both terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The build quality also represents a different era. Porsche was still hand-assembling 993 body shells at the Zuffenhausen factory, largely before the company ramped up mass production robotics for the 996. Each car had more individual attention during assembly, which partly explains why well-maintained 993s have such a solid bank vault feel to them. This attention to detail extended to every aspect of the car. The paint was applied in multiple thin coats rather than the thick single coats used on many modern cars. The interior materials were chosen for durability and feel rather than cost optimization. Even small details like the way the door handles operated or how the ventilation controls clicked into position reflected a level of craftsmanship that's increasingly rare in today's automotive landscape. Today's collector car market reflects the 993's special status. As of 2025, clean Carrera coupes in good condition are trading around $80,000, with the best manual transmission examples closer to $100,000. Carrera S and 4S models command between $120,000 and $160,000 depending on mileage and specification. These aren't just inflated collector prices either. The 993 offers genuine usability alongside its investment potential. The Turbo and Turbo S models have entered truly exotic territory. Regular turbos are selling for well over $250,000. While Turbo S examples are transacting north of $350,000. Special order cars with unique specifications are pushing past $500,000. At these price points, 993 turbos are competing with modern supercars, but they're offering something completely different: authenticity. What's driving these values isn't just scarcity, though the relatively low production numbers certainly help. It's the combination of usability, performance, and character that modern cars struggle to match. A 993 Turbo can keep up with contemporary sports cars on most roads, but it does so while providing an experience that's become impossible to replicate with modern technology and regulations. The investment potential is real too. Unlike many classic cars that require extensive mechanical knowledge or deep pockets for maintenance, a well-maintained 993 can be driven regularly without fear of catastrophic failure. The air-cooled engine, while more complex than a typical water-cooled unit, is fundamentally robust and can handle regular use without complaint. The 993's legacy extends far beyond its status as the last air-cooled 911. It proved that Porsche could modernize the 911 without losing its essential character. The multi-link rear suspension system it introduced became the template for every 911 that followed. The 6-speed manual transmission set a new standard for sports car gearboxes that other manufacturers scrambled to match. But the cultural impact goes deeper than just technical innovations. The 993 represented a bridge between the raw, uncompromising sports cars of the past and the sophisticated, refined machines of today. It offered enough modern convenience and safety to be genuinely usable as daily transportation, while retaining the mechanical character and driver involvement that made earlier 911s so special. For the American market specifically, the 993 hit at exactly the right time. The economy was strong, emissions regulations were becoming more stringent, and buyers were looking for alternatives to the muscle cars that had dominated American performance car culture for decades. The 993 offered European sophistication and engineering excellence wrapped in a package that was small enough to navigate crowded cities, but capable enough to dominate any racetrack. Yet the engine, cooled by nothing more sophisticated than air and oil, closed a chapter that no manufacturer will ever reopen. The combination of traditional air cooling with modern chassis dynamics, build quality, and usability created something special. It's a car that works as well for daily driving as it does for weekend canyon runs or track days. The motorsports heritage adds another layer to the 993's appeal. While the street cars were reaching new levels of refinement, Porsche was also developing the 993-based GT2 for racing. This lightweight, rear-wheel drive monster made over 400 horsepower from its twin-turbo engine and competed successfully in international GT racing. The connection between the street car and the race car was still direct and obvious, unlike today's heavily modified racing machines. For many enthusiasts, this combination of innovation and finality explains why the 993 isn't just another classic car. It represents the definitive answer to what a 911 should be: fast enough to thrill, reliable enough to trust, and analog enough to create a genuine connection between driver and machine. The 993 proved that evolution doesn't always mean revolution. Sometimes the best approach is to perfect what already works rather than starting over. In doing so, Porsche created not just the best air-cooled 911, but arguably one of the best sports cars ever built. That's why, more than 25 years after the last one rolled off the production line, the 993 continues to set the standard for what a true sports car should feel like. It's not just about the numbers on paper or even the driving experience, though both are exceptional. It's about the emotional connection between man and machine that's been largely lost in our modern world of electronic assistance and regulatory compliance. The 993 remains a reminder of what cars used to be and what they could be again if we prioritized soul over statistics.